Hello everyone, welcome to this first video about the series about the Chebanenko Slav. So as I told you in the introduction video, my goal here is to provide you with a full repertoire with black, but not after the first move, of course, after the moves d4, d5, c4, c6. So showing that you are willing to play the Slav defense. Your opponent doesn't know yet which Slav defense you're gonna play. So of course, if you want to play the Chebanenko, which is a Slav with a6, as I told you before, you have to know about every possibilities for white to play already on the third move, and there are many sidelines that we're going to see. Of course, the first one that comes to mind, and the first that usually bores black when they play the Slav defense, is the exchange Slav, but I didn't want to start with this one because I feel it's not very entertaining for you, so I'm gonna start with the smallest move, moves that you're not going to see so often, and so move already on the third move, but also on the fourth move after knight c3. There will be some possibilities. So the first possibility for white that we are going to look is the move bishop to f4. So the point of this move is to try to play e3 on the next move, a bit like as in the London systems. White is willing to play e3 slowly, then play knight c3, and he is already able to take back with the bishop on c4. So this is something we don't want to see happening, so we are going to take immediately in order to be able to play some moves like b5 in order to protect the pawn. After white is attacking it, we can protect it with b5. So of course, two possibilities. We are leaving the full control of the center to white, so we need to look after e4. So this kind of variation we're going to see a lot in this video. First with bishop f4 on the third move as here, but later with the move knight c3 before. And you will see that it makes some difference, but it can also sometimes transpose. So first, after e4, so the first thing is we can play b5, obviously, but when white managed to get his two central pawns here, he can be usually happy, so we want to challenge them, and the idea is to play knight f6. After knight f6, of course, if the pawn push, then we go to d5, winning a tempo on the bishop on f4, and we will have time to play b5 next, so no problem for white, and for black, sorry. And so better, of course, is for white is to simply protect the pawn in order to keep both pawns on the same file. They are of course stronger and still on e4 and d4. And now that the knight has come to c3, we can play b5, intending to challenge the knight by sometimes winning b4 in order to take the pawn on e4. So once again, the problem with white's position is that if he pushes to d5, then we are able to play knight d5, gaining a pretty important tempo on the bishop. So white shouldn't push to e5. He should, more or less, play f3, still trying to keep both pawns protected. But after e6, at some point white has to challenge also our queenside, or otherwise he's just a pawn down. And we have time to play b4, obviously chasing the knight. And after knight a2, bishop a6, so very theoretical. Here b4 is protected. It's not always the case. Sometimes b4 is hanging, so black can't keep both pawns, but here it's possible to protect simply c4, as b4 is already protected. So of course white needs to try to take his pawn back, and after rook c1 we can try to develop the pieces quickly. We can see that c4 is under protection, so white is still unable to restore the material balance, and it will be very easy to undouble the pawn by playing c5 at some point. For example, after knight h3 and bishop e2, so white is trying to castle as soon as possible, then we have time to play c5. And it's really annoying for white, because if he takes, then the bishop takes, and we can see that short castle will be very, very difficult for white. But so he's still a pawn down. He has to do something with his d pawn, so he's definitely in trouble. He can't push because he doesn't control d5 enough, because the knight is pinned. So very hard position now already for white. So let's get back to this position after d takes c4. Once white plays e3, then we don't have time for knight f6. Knight f6 is basically doing nothing. So we need to protect the pawn immediately. And of course the difference is now we don't have any b4 move, but also white only pushed to e3, so it's also a bit in our favor. And after knight f6, knight c3, very logical, because after ab, cb, b3 is possible. So this is a theoretical way of playing for white, trying to get his pawn back. But then we have a very strong move, trying to take advantage that white played an early bishop f4, which is not so strong and not so relevant here. So we play e5 immediately. Gaining a tempo on the bishop is very important. And after bishop takes or pawn takes, doesn't make any difference. We want to play bishop b4, and it's already winning for black, because knight d2 is the blunder after c3. If the knight moves, then c2 is killing with check. And after king e2, of course, it's pretty ugly for white, and we can simply develop it, protect the pawn on c4. Be ready to take back with the bishop if we want to keep chasing the king. So already a really bad position for white. So he shouldn't try to immediately take his pawn back. He should definitely challenge the pawn with knight c3. But then again, we have ideas with b4, of course. But the difference with the line with e4 is that white didn't have to play f3 also to protect the center. So he has an extra tempo, and it makes things a little bit more difficult, because now there are two pawns hanging, so we can't protect them both. So white has good chances to take his pawn back. Of course, white can't really claim for an advantage, but at least he can try to claim equality here. So I prefer to play the move queen b6, which hasn't been played in top level games. Anyway, this position wasn't played in top level games, but queen b6 is a bit less logical than b4, but I feel it's fully playable here for black. We just protect the pawn on b5, and I couldn't find a possibility for white to give us any trouble, because after A, B, C, B, and B3 we can play E5, which is again very strong because bishop B4 is coming. So for example, bishop takes bishop to B4. So of course this is something that is completely impossible when white has played in the opening, when white has played knight f3 instead of bishop f2, f4. Because with the bishop on c1 we can always go bishop d2, protect everything, and everything is fine for white. The thing is, white played bishop f4 too early, so he's unable to protect his queen side in some cases. And here, if he goes knight g e2, then again we put some pressure on the knight, rook c1 for example, and bishop to f5, and we have some ideas like that. Maybe takes a knight on e2 in order to be able to eliminate the knight on c3. Position is very close to losing already for white, and he should hurry to try to find some salvation move, but it's far from easy. So yeah, this is pretty bad for white, sorry. And after queen b6, the other move is knight f3, of course, but simply e6, bishop to e2, knight bd7. This is somehow too slow for white. He will be unable to get his pawn back. We can develop in many ways. We can go bishop b to b4 now, for example. And black, to my eyes, at least, black is already much better because white doesn't have enough composition here. We can see that the center isn't even going to start moving in the next move. And the next moves for black are quite simple. We will go short castle, probably a6 in order to defend everything, and then bishop to b7 and c5. And once we manage to play c5, black is basically very close to winning if he manages to keep an extra pawn and play c5. So we can see that white has only a few moves before he's in a critical situation. So probably he's already in critical position, but still he has some play, but it's not the best. I mean, there are very similar kind of variation that exist, and this one is really a worse one. So as we saw, this move bishop f4 is probably too soon in the opening, so no problem for black, but I can only remind you not to play as in the Chebanenko. Don't play knight f6, then a6, and don't let the possibility to white to have an healthy development after e3, knight c3. It makes no sense. Here we can take advantage of this too soon move bishop to f4. So other possibilities, of course, knight to c3, and after knight to f6. So this can still transpose in many other positions of the Chebanenko. Knight c3 is not a bad move, but here we'll have a look at two bishop moves, so the same as before. The moves bishop to f4, as in the previous line, and then the move bishop to g5, pinning, not really pinning, but attacking the knight on f6. So after bishop f4, of course we take, and the first thing is after e3 or e4, so after these two moves, we can simply go b5, and this are position we already talked about in the previous line with 3 bishop to f4. So this would make no difference. So the only move we need to look at is the move a4, trying to stop bishop b5, to stop b5 immediately. And once again we take advantage of the bishop already on f4 by playing the move knight d5. A bit of a strange move to again move the same piece in the opening, but of course if white takes, then the pawn takes back, and then that means that c4 is well protected. So black will have a strong extra pawn, so white is unable to take. He needs to move his bishop. So after bishop d2 there is a strong reply, which is the move e5, simply opening the center immediately. And the point is, after de, knight b4, the knight heads towards interesting squares such as c2 and d3 that can be controlled easily after bishop f2, f5. And after just start with knight a6, anyway, bishop f5 wouldn't make sense yet because of e4. So we can develop, and white has some problems because now if he moves his pawn, maybe there will be some knight d3 with check possibilities. So it's really hard for white to finish the development properly. So instead, bishop g3. Once again, the danger, at least for white, is that the bishop is already too far on the king side. So maybe we can manage to get some problems on this diagonal or with queen a5. So this is some kind of an issue for white, and we will do it by taking on c3 and then playing queen a5, simply developing the queen, forcing a move like queen d2, and after knight to d7, e4, knight b6, then c4 is protected well. Also, even if it's not clear if we are going to be able to take it, but the pawn on a4 is hanging, so at some point it can become a source of a problem for white. And then after knight f3, g6, bishop to e2, bishop g4. Then again, I don't see how white is going to get his pawn back. So he has a center, he definitely has some compensations, but once we castle, put our work on d8, so the next two moves are probably short castle and probably c5 at some point with rook d8. And of course, I already prefer black with an extra pawn very hard for white to get back, so I don't feel it looks like a good variation for white. So this bishop f4 is very similar to bishop f4 on the previous move, obviously. And after bishop to g5, the ideas are quite different, but we apply the same medicine and we take on c4. Once again, the bishop will have some trouble because he went too soon on a development square, which is not necessarily good for him. So after d takes c4, against the three same possibilities, to be e3, trying to get the pawn back, e4 with the same point, but taking more the center, but also having a less healthy center, let's say. And of course the last possibility being a4, stopping the move b5. So first, e3 is the most logical, let's say. Then we go b5. We don't want white to be able to take back on c4 so easily. And after a4, b4, knight b1, because knight a2 is not so strong anymore after knight e4, so we gain a tempo on the bishop, and then some move like queen a5. White is in trouble of the threat b3, so he needs to develop at some point, but this won't go very good for him, so something like e5 again, developing very quickly, intending bishop to b4 in the next move, and black is already much better, very close to winning, so already a very good position for black. And instead knight to b1, then we simply protect the pawn on c4. There is no need to protect also the pawn on b4, which is not under attack. And after knight d2, the point will be that we can push to c3. Again, maybe we are going at some point to lose the pawn back, but then it will have takes many tempo to white to take it, and his development is far from obvious right now. After bc, knight to b3, we take on f1, so the king can't castle anymore, and maybe the move queen d5 is appealing to black because we gain a tempo on the bishop, and after bishop takes to f6, then queen c4 is quite annoying with the move c2, and we don't see how white are going to eliminate now this pawn, because we can simply take on b3. So the bishop on f6 has to move, obviously. How to take the pawn on c2 back, it's a very hard question for me. So again, black is maybe not yet winning, but clearly better, for sure. So after bishop a6, instead of knight d2, let's say white takes on f6 first, so he doesn't have any problem on the bishop anymore. And after ef, queen c1, attacking the pawn, then again c3, intending if it's important to understand that if white takes on a6, then we have the intermediate move c takes b2 in order to keep an extra pawn, and then only then we will take back on a6. So white has no choice. If he wants his pawn back, then he needs to take on c3. Then we again make the white king move, and simply some move like c5. And I think in this kind of position, white has let's say a strong pass pawn, protected pass pawn on d4, but we have the same on b4, and it looks like a pawn like this on the flank is more dangerous than a central pass pawn, because it will be easier for black to stop it. For example, with the bishop on d6, we don't really see how the pawn is going to get any farther than the fifth rank. So let's give a small plus to black in this kind of position. He has a bishop, he has a king which can steal castles, so it's definitely a slight advantage to black. So e3 is not very appealing anymore for white. So let's have a look at e4, which is a bit different. After e4 we played b5. As we saw in the previous variation with the bishop on f4, then if white goes f3 it will be too slow, so let's try another variation now, the move e5. But then the knight moves to d5, so the bishop is not under attack anymore, he's not on f4. So this is a good point for white, but the main thing is we managed to dislocate white's center. The pawn, the e pawn, had to advance, and this is very good for us because of the d5 square where we already have a knight. And if whites want to counter attack on b5, we can always just chase the bishop. The point is, if he goes to h4, then b4, knight e4, g5, we gain a lot of developing move, because we will manage to play bishop g7 at some point, and we don't want to lose the pawn, so we play c3. We make things as difficult as possible for white to take it back. And after b takes c3, we start with bishop f4, chasing the knight, much stronger than to take back immediately. And for example f3, we can just take on c3, and in case of some moves like bishop c4, they will still have this kind of fork. So it's not horrible for white. I mean, we need to take it, but it's not yet sure if white is able to take his pawn, his c3 pawn back, because he has a problem on e4 now. Black also has the bishop pair, so it's pretty nice for him. And yeah, this kind of endgame after queen takes and knight takes c3, e6 still look slightly easier for black, because his pieces are coming very easily to good squares. The king on e8 will reach d7 very easily and remain in the center of the board, which is always nice in the endgames. While white's king, it looks a bit less safe, let's say, so it's a bit different. So after h6, bishop d2 is another option, and then b4 again, chasing the knight. We had the pawn under attack, so we chase the knight. And of course, taking on d5 is not something that we can advise. white to do, because now the pawn on c4 is extremely strong. We gain some tempo on the bishop, and it's pretty clear that black is already much better with his pawn on c4 is already annoying. He has a b5, he has a good development. He will just play e6, bishop e7, or bishop b4, and he will be better. So knight e4 is more logical, but after the simple c3 and bishop f4, the same variation as before, we gain a tempo on the knight. And c4 is not really helping, so if the knight had moved, then we would have taken with the pawn on c3 attacking the bishop. So white is more or less trying to invent something working, but it's not. So we just take, and after bishop takes d5, bishop takes b4, just play knight d7, and the bishop on d5, we can see that the bishop on d5 is a monster. It's really hard to trade it. And also white can have some problems on the center once black has managed to play with c5. We can see that both d4 and e5 are quite weak, so it's quite simple for black to try to put some pressure on white center. So e4 once again is not perfect to white, and a4 we have seen a very similar line, but here we take advantage of the bishop in a different way. We play queen to a5, so immediately attacking the bishop. Knight f3 is obviously met with knight b7, simply trying to protect the knight on f6, and after some moves like bishop d2, so strong move e5 is a reply you have to look at. We have to be certain that there are no intermediate moves, no discovery of the knight, any dangerous moves, but once we manage to see that the knight can't come to d5 because of queen takes, and that after queen b5, then it will be very easy to come back to d8 with the queen and the knight is doing nothing. It's pretty clear that this knight can't do anything. So after e3, bishop to b4, bishop takes, short castle, e4. At some point we manage to play e4. And white will always suffer from a lack of space in these middle games. For example, after knight e1, knight to b6. And then we finish the development with bishop to e6. And in the next moves we are going to probably take on c3 in order to take either definitely this kind of square. If the pawn takes back on c3, then the knight will go to c4, obviously. And if the bishop takes, then we will move the queen somewhere, probably f5, and then we will have the full control over the d5 square, which is very important. And also we try to play on the king side because we have a strong pawn on e4. So we want to try to get an attack on the king side, because every white pieces are difficult to bring back to the king side. So let's say that concludes this second variation of knight c3 with the small moves of bishop f4, bishop g5. So as I told you, we will see the moves like e3 later. But first, let's see the move e3 now, immediately. And with some idea that after knight f6, white doesn't play knight f3 or knight c3 because it will transpose in other variation. But white has another option. He also doesn't take on d5 because it's an exchange variation with e3 that makes no sense. So white can play the move bishop to d3, but it's more or less refuted by a very strong, very powerful move, which is e5. This is a good improvement over minigames. The first point of the move e5 is that if Oh, first, let's try to explain the move bishop to d3. The point is, white is willing to play the move knight f3, transposing into the line knight f3, but having stopped black from playing two of his main options here, which are bishop g4 and bishop to f5. So he's just trying to get an opening where black couldn't play two of his most dangerous variations. So if you play e6 and knight f3, and white is quite happy. So we need to do something immediately, and e5 is really recommended. And the point after the obvious move d takes e5 is that we have the intermediate. We don't need to move the knight. We have the intermediate d takes c4 with the problem on d1 immediately. So there is only one playable, let's say, move for white, which is bishop to e2. The other moves are quite bad for white. After taking the knight, for example, we just take the bishop, something like fg7 and bishop takes knight f3, and at some point will be just much better because we have many ways to try to protect the pawn on d3. It's really hard for white to do anything, and bishop on g7 is great. We have the bishop pair in an open position, so this is something you don't want to play with white. And after d takes c4, bishop takes c4, the point is obviously to take on d1 and to play knight g4. I won't go any farther in this line because it's pretty clear that black is for sure at least okay because he takes his pawn back. He will have a good position, and let's say one thing is that king to e2, the logical move king e2 is bad because of knight takes e5, and after bishop to b3, then b6, immediately challenging the king because bishop a6 is coming. So this is already pretty bad for white. Is really far from equalizing with white. So king e2, the most logical, isn't really playable. So instead, the bishop e2 is probably best for white, but simply taking on d1, knight to g4, and if white wants to keep his pawns on the center and e5, he needs to play f4, otherwise he will be at least traded against the c4 pawns. If he wants to do something, he needs to play f4, but immediately bishop to c5. Only one move to protect the pawn on e3, which is king to e2, but after king e2, bishop f5 is already much better for black. Simply bishop d3 on the next move. So here is the occasion for white to get an equal position. This is maybe the lesser evil, is to play knight to a3, and then we simply take on e3, bishop takes, knight c4, bishop takes f4, and doesn't look really appealing for white at first sight, but at least he will get decent compensations. First on the f7 pawn, because he will probably short castle very soon. He also having some possibilities of knight d6 or bishop to b3. So at least he should be able to equalize despite having a pawn down. But yeah, let's say he can't have more, but he should manage equality here. At least this is not so bad for him. So let's get back to e5. There are other possibilities. First other possibility is to play c takes d5, but again intermediate moves are very important, and we can start with the move e4. Obviously, if we take back on d5, there is d takes e5, and we can't take on c4 anymore. So the same variation as before is not working anymore, so we need this intermediate move. And after bishop to e2, cd, queen b3, it's already pretty clear that black has to be better because the bishop has moved twice to go to e2. the center is in black's favor, so it's of course already good for black, and something like bishop to d6. At some point bishop to e6. We are not afraid of queen takes b7 because of the winning move knight to a5, gaining the queen at least against at the most against a rook and a couple of pawns. So this is already winning for black, of course. So it's impossible to take b7, and we will just short castle, and it's not clear how white finished his development. So we see the importance of the move a6. It's in order to be able to move the bishop on c8 and to trap the queen if the queen takes on b7. A very thematical move after such a move as queen b3. And the last possibility, maybe, I don't know, maybe the strongest if whites want to get something in this opening, is to play knight to c3. Here again e4, and after bishop to c2, here at least the bishop leaves place to the knight to come on e2, so this is probably a better version for white. Then we just play bishop to d6, and here I would say it's pretty important for white to go f3, because if he doesn't challenge immediately our center, if he goes, for example, knight g to e2 and some slow development, then at some point we will just have a full control on the d5 square, and even the moves like c5 and b4 trying to get some counterplay, it won't really help white or wait or get him anywhere, because the point is we want at some point to go knight to e8 and leave place to a pawn storm on the king side. And it's not easy for white to manage to get any counterplay here, so I definitely prefer black. I mean, at least from a practical point of view. So f3 is necessary to my eyes. And after f3, so I like the move queen to e7. So it has been played by Kempinski, a strong Polish grandmaster, against Russian Dubov. So Dubov played f takes e4, which is very, very logical, that it leads to black advantage. Maybe cd and then only f takes e4 is a bit better, but still white is a bit struggling to keep equality, and yeah, I still prefer black's chances here. So I've been playing the same through the whole video. It looks good. Yeah, this is again already better for black, who will get some play on the king side, on many sides of the board. So cd was maybe slightly better, but he played immediately knight f takes, knight takes, and then knight f3, intending to not to leave a black pawn on an e4. This is obviously a possible idea, but after short castle and f5, then black is happy to show that white has a problem on the e4 square. So maybe the best is to play as Dubov played, cd, knight takes on cd, because at least here white can try to put some pressure on d5, but it's probably not going to go very far, because we can protect it with, let's say, simply bishop e6, or maybe also knight to d7 and then knight f6. So this will be possible to protect the pawn on d5. Which is harder to say is what will white do about his e-pawn, also his e4 square. The e3 pawn is of course very, very weak. So at least I wouldn't like to play this as white. I think the position is more or less okay, and they both managed to draw, but but Kempinski can't complain about anything, and it was a very comfortable draw with black. So this concludes this first video here about every or some slight variations on the third move. So on the next video, of course, we have to do it. We have to look the variations happening, the theory happening after the exchange variation, and we are going to try to show that it's not as, let's say, boring as it may look at the first glance. So yeah, for the next video about the exchange variation, please follow it. Thank you.